The views and opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of this station and/or Confederation College.
Alrighty, welcome to Spirit Canoe. My name is Bob Goujon. Um, Once again, well, we live in a complicated modern world, right? Everybody has lots of schedules, and sometimes those schedules conflict. So, what we had hoped to have this evening was Chief Georgianne Morisseau, Chief of the Fort William First Nation, but unfortunately, as I say, scheduling conflicts being what they are, she was unable to make it tonight. So we're going to do something else. I'm kind of going guestless this evening, but that's okay. We have some material for you. But maybe before we get into that, just to sort of talk a little bit about what's coming, I'm hoping to see the chief come back. Next week, and again, these plans are always tentative, given, as I say, the complicated scheduling lives we're all leading these days. So next week, there's, well, on the one hand, it's a lounge just down the hall from here. It's called the Apawin Lounge. And I think Apawin in Ojibwe means looking forward or something. I'll have to double check on that. But at any rate, it's kind of it's an open meeting space on the one hand, but there's a number of counselors who function as facilitators for new students. And the lounge is, well, I might describe it as Aboriginally themed, but it's not exclusively for Aboriginal students. So the student navigators who function as consultants to students, a group of them are going to come in next week. That's the plan, and discuss about various issues that they're working with and dealing with as members of an educational institution here in Thunder Bay and Northern Ontario, and how they negotiate and navigate the path, educational path for Indigenous students and all students in the kind of cultural climate we're in, and anyways, their perspective on all of these issues. So we're looking forward to that. And then the week after that, the plan is Joy Asham, who you have seen on the program a couple of times. She writes a column for the Chronicle Journal, Anishinaabeg Voice, and so she's going to come in with herself being a writer and another writer, and we're going to discuss writerly things. Other than that, I'm not quite too sure yet. But and I know she's got a book coming out, not in the too distant future. So we need to talk about that as well. And then that would take us to November 6th, if I'm not mistaken. And that's when, hopefully, Chief Georgianne Morisseau will be able to make it back, and we can have the conversation that we'd hoped to have tonight, but won't be. So it's just being put off to a future date. And then one of the things I'm going to talk about in more detail, well, maybe just is there's going to be a conference coming up. Maybe I'll talk about that. So, but first, I'll just mention what we are going to be doing tonight. A few weeks ago, the Apawin Lounge folks, the student navigators, were along with people from Lakehead University and Oshki and I don't know if Matawa folks, different educational institutions had a kind of a joint student orientation, and it was called Matadizi 2014. And so it was post-secondary student orientation. It happened down at Marina Park, and Wob Canoe was one of the speakers, the keynote speaker, and so he gave a presentation. I aired half of his talk a few weeks ago, and I've sort of kept the other half in storage, so to speak, and for that rainy day. And today is the rainy day when our guest unfortunately couldn't make it. So we're going to listen to the other half of the Wob Canoe keynote speech. That's the idea. Now, I don't know if many of you are familiar with Wob Canoe. I actually first became aware of him. He hosted the Eighth Fire CBC documentary, which I've actually used in some of my teaching contexts as course content. Don't tell CBC that. But, well, fair use and all of that. So that's what we're going to hear this evening is the other half of that. But just to get back to what's going to happen, I guess on November 13th, the plan, there is a conference going to take place regarding the Lakehead University Faculty of Law. They're going to have an Aboriginal Law Student Conference on November 7th. I've registered myself to attend. So it's just I don't know if you can see. So it's part of the 250th anniversary of the Treaty of Niagara, which, so they say, we look to explore the Aboriginal law landscape. What's on the horizon? So Treaty of Niagara, just again, the thumbnail sketch of what that's all about. Okay, so the North America, Turtle Island, is, just Indigenous peoples all over the place living and getting along, and they're having fun, so to speak, living their Indigenous lives. And of course, those guys from the other side of the Atlantic arrive roughly around 1492 plus. And the French are the first to really start settling in the northern half of Turtle Island. And then, of course, the English are along the 13 colonies, and they're settling down there. And, of course, there's the fur trade in Rupert's Land with the Hudson Bay Company, and there's some English settlements in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. But by and large, of course, it's New France, which is running down the St. Lawrence and around the Great Lakes and down the Mississippi and Missouri. And so that's New France. And, of course, the English and French, who are quarreling seemingly forever, have another big, what are we going to call it, bash up. And the long and the short of it, 1759, the fall of Quebec, and suddenly everything is British North America. And at that point, of course, there's the Royal Proclamation, 1763, 4 years later, which more or less sets out some of the rules of this from the perspective of the British, who now control not only Nova Scotia and the 13 colonies and believe that they control what's Rupert's Land, which is the watershed of the Hudson Bay. All the rivers that flow into Hudson Bay, that's the territory covered by the charter to the Hudson Bay Company called Rupert's Land. But there's this giant body of territory, which is essentially below the Great Lakes running down the Mississippi. Everything west of the Appalachian Mountains is considered Indian country, reserved for Indigenous peoples. And some people refer to that as the Magna Carta of Indigenous rights under the British Crown. Right? Now, there's great debate about what that means. What is it to be under the British Crown? And what is it to have this territory reserved for Indigenous peoples? So there's legal issues around that. Some people think the Royal Proclamation, in terms of its language, indicates that Indigenous peoples have become subjects of the British Crown. But a year later, at the Treaty of Niagara, which involved over 20 First Nations, 2,000 people from different nations participated in the Treaty of Niagara, and that was with the British Crown. William Johnson was a representative for the British Crown and conducted treaty, covenant chain, with these 20 First Nations a year after the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which followed the fall of Quebec, which of course did not mean the fall of Indigenous peoples. It was the fall of the French Empire in North America, not the fall of Indigenous peoples. At any rate, you don't do treaties with subjects, which is one of the topics we got into, Karen Drake and I, the law professor, in the first episode of Spirit Canoe. You don't do treaties with subjects. So whatever implications there might be in the Royal Proclamation 1763 after the fall of Quebec, that Indigenous peoples are turned into subjects, well, a year after, the British Crown sits down and does treaties with these folks. So it's pretty hard to imagine that they're subjects if the British Crown is doing treaties with them. So that's kind of the foundation of the country insofar as, the government in Ottawa and Toronto thinks of themselves as their governmental authority flows from the British mandate, if you like, in North America. There's a bit of a legal contest going on as to what the implications of those early events are, and they're still being played out. So, thus the reference to the 250th anniversary of the Treaty of Niagara, the Aboriginal law landscape, what's on the horizon. So I've registered, now just to cover off a couple of those points, it's free to register for the conference, although it's a restricted list. I'm hoping my registration online. So they do have a website. Just go and do a Google search on Thunder Bay Lakehead University Law School, and then scroll down to the bottom of the law school page, and you'll see a link there about the conference, and you can follow the links and you can register if you want to. So it's going to be an all-day thing. I'll get into the details of that after the WAB Canoe keynote speech. But it's free to register. There's a dinner so that's going to be at the law school, which is the old PACI high school, right? And then in the evening there's a dinner, and you have to pay for dinner. It's going to be down at the Prince Arthur. So if you want to have dinner as part of the day, so it's free. Well, I'll look up the details, but it's really meant for the law school students. But other students and other people can. I'm not one of those. So, and I was able to register, but the seating is restricted. So check out their website if you're. I'll go through the speakers list after we hear from WAB Canoe. So just a heads up on that. And then those folks, that is actually Karen Drake and a few students, are going to come on November 13th. That's the plan. So that's a week after the conference, and we're going to kind of hash out some of the issues that they were discussing at the conference and whatever else comes to mind. So that's by way of preamble to all of that. So just to go back to what we're going to be listening to for the next few minutes. So the post-secondary student orientation that took place at Marina Park, this was back in early September, called Madadizi, which means he or she starts a journey. So WAB Canoe was the keynote speaker, and he gave a speech, talking to these, it was directed at students. And we heard the first half a few weeks ago. And so this is going to be the second half of that keynote speech.
We will have a few short speeches, and I promise you they'll be short, so they'll require your attention. But first of all, I want to welcome you. Welcome everyone to Madadizi 2014. Madadizi is a joint Aboriginal post-secondary student orientation. Madadizi in the Ojibwe language means he or she starts a journey. Your journey as students has started, and we hope that this year is an amazing year for you. 8 Thunder Bay organizations came together to bring you what we hope will be beneficial to you as a student here in Thunder Bay. WAB Canoe is a Canadian musician, broadcaster, and educator. Best known for his work with CBC Radio and CBC Television. He is originally from Anugaming First Nation. His hip-hop work has won an Aboriginal People's Choice Music Award. His journalism has won an Adrian Clarkson RTNDA Award, a Gabriel Award, and has been nominated for a Gemini Award. In 2012, the University of Winnipeg named WAB as its first Director of Indigenous Inclusion. Most recently, WAB has been appointed Associate Vice President for Indigenous Government and Community Affairs at the University of Winnipeg. Also contemplating a run for National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, WAB is a leader, a role model, and a change maker. Please help me in welcoming WAB Canoe to the stage.
And so we have a ways to go yet. If you've been paying attention to the First Nations Education Act controversy, you know that some of the issues are contentious. And regardless of how you feel about how that controversy played out, the mere fact that our First Nations leaders have to even ask for equal funding for kids on reserve tells you something about this country that is an uncomfortable truth, which is to say that in 2014, First Nations people still need to negotiate for equality. Is that consistent with your vision of Canada? Is that consistent with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms? That merely because of where you are born, you may have a longer path on the road to success? I don't think so. I don't think that's consistent with anyone's vision of Canada. So I know that we can change it. And the way forward for me is to reach out beyond our communities. As I travel around this country, I see that there are more non-Native people than ever who want to do right by First Nations people, want to do right by Métis people. And so I think we can work together with them. Often you hear talk like, oh, we need to bring the government to its knees. Well, the real way to bring a government to its knees is to get the majority of the voting public on side. And I think that we can do that. If we look across the various issues with which we are engaged in, whether it's education, child welfare, natural resources, addressing historic wrongs, the missing and murdered women, First Nations people are in the right on almost every one of those issues. We occupy the moral high ground on every one of those issues. And yet, why is it that we can't communicate that reality to the rest of the country? Well, part of it is that it takes time. It takes time for us to get educated. It takes time for us to develop experience, to step up into those roles, and to communicate this reality, and to win the support that we need to bring about that change that we need. But I'm confident that I see it happening. And I'm really excited by that. I think that in our lifetime, we will see the transformation that we want. We will see all children in this country, especially First Nations children in this country, free to be everything that they want to be. I also know that we're probably, in our lifetime, we'll also see the first First Nations Prime Minister of this country. She may have just declared her candidacy for one of the parties. We'll see. But when we start thinking about the future, to me, that's where things get really interesting and really exciting. Because everything that I'm talking about so far, it's about social justice, right? It's about equality. It's about making kids have a fair shot. And that's really important. That's super important. Absolutely it is. But I'm not satisfied with that. I don't want equality. I don't want what everyone else has. I don't want an equal state. The real vision that I have for Indigenous people and for Indigenous communities and Indigenous nations is the same vision that I believe that our ancestors had. And that is for us to stand up and be global leaders. Leaders showing the way to a more sustainable society and a more meaningful way of life. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Right now, there are certain great issues of our time. Income inequality is one of them. Right now in the United States of America, there's an ever-growing movement towards trying to make sure the richest in the society allow the poorest to share more equally in the spoils of success. It's not my cell phone, by the way, so don't get the wrong idea. The other great issue of our time is the environment, right? Tailings ponds are bursting open in the West. Rising floodwaters everywhere. Hydraulic fracturing has created earthquakes in places like Oklahoma where there never were earthquakes before. And if you talk to social scientists and researchers, they'll tell you that we're living in a different age today. If you go back in the time, there's different markers for the historic eras that you're in, like the Pleistocene era, right? Like when there's dinosaurs. or the Mesocene era, right? Well, they say that today we are living in the Anthropocene, which means that human beings ourselves, we are the dominant, not just social and political and economic force on the planet, but also a geologic force, a force that is changing things all around us, in some cases for better, but in some cases for worse. And so we need to come to terms with our environmental impact, while at the same time recognizing the fact that, hey, I like having an iPhone, right? The minerals for that iPhone come out of the earth. I like driving a truck. That means that I am a consumer who's demanding the products created by pipelines, right? And all of us, whether we drive a truck or not, are dependent on carbon-based economies. So we need to find a balance. What is the way forward there? I'll tell you a few examples. I work at the University of Winnipeg. I'm the executive there. And over the past few years, we've started up a few programs that really excite me. One of them is Anishinaabe Monatawata Niga Banoji. Let's speak Ojibwe to our kids. It's a free after-school community learning program to teach kids Ojibwe or Cree language. It's their choice. And we do a lot of the activities that you would expect. Games, songs, arts, crafts, and things like that. But we also incorporate science, technology, engineering concepts, and mathematics into those teachings as well. And so, for instance, one day we made rockets, right? And the young people really enjoyed it because the rocket is fueled by Diet Coke and Mentos, right? You put those together in a container and it explodes, and then the rocket gets launched into the sky. But while we're talking about that, we're also able to teach them about the night sky, the Anishinaabe cosmology. Because you go study astronomy at university, most likely they're going to teach you the constellations which derive from a Greek or Roman history and a Greek or Roman culture, right? But our peoples, we have our own cosmology, our own way of looking at the night sky. And so we're able to teach that to young people. Here's one constellation, Benassi. Here's another one, Maganegi. Here's another one, Nagakana. Beautiful things. And then when we get to describing the chemical reaction that creates the carbon dioxide, we're able to teach them that term in Anishinaabe as well. Kaumboya gamasek. Kaumboya gamasek. Creating bubbles, this chemical reaction. And so sometimes this is surprising to people, right? They're like, wait a minute, you have a word in Ojibwe for chemical reaction, for astronomy, for math? And it's like, yes, absolutely we do. You know? There's a lie that's been told about many of our peoples, right? And it's that we did not have civilization prior to the coming of European peoples. But that is a lie. And the most challenging part of that lie is that many of our own peoples have started to believe it too. Right? So we're able to turn back that towards the truth and remind people that yes, our ancestors had a rich intellectual life. Our ancestors were smart, were curious, were engaged with sciences and math. And if you're a young person who is fascinated by math, is fascinated by science, then you should feel free to pursue that and to celebrate that. Another program that we've been able to launch is called Young Entrepreneurs. And what it is a training program for high school students that shows them how to develop a business plan out of their ideas, and then they pitch it to investors, sort of like a Dragon's Den kind of thing. At the same time, we introduce them to the traditional culture. So we take them to sweats. They do teachings with spiritual leaders. They do giveaways. They learn about all those things. And then they bring back what they've learned about the Anishinaabe culture and the Dakota culture and the Cree culture into the business context. So for instance, they learn about offerings. If you're going to take something from the forest, you should leave an offering. If you're going to take an animal, there's a certain way that you should prepare the body. If you're going to cut down a tree, you're supposed to put down tobacco. If you're going to take a rock, put down tobacco. Then they bring that into the business context and ask themselves, all right, so what would happen to a timber operation if they had to put down tobacco for each tree that they cut? What would happen to a diamond mine if they had to leave an offering for each rock that they took out of the earth? And that's kind of like an interesting, oh, hey, yeah, that's kind of a pie in the sky idea. But it's actually a very contemporary management philosophy, right? It's called triple bottom line accounting. That you should pay attention not just to your financial bottom line, but you should also pay attention to the environmental and the social impact that your business is having, right? It's also similar to what politicians talk about when they talk about a carbon tax, right? The idea that you need to internalize the costs that big polluters are making. The fact that you need to make a pipeline company or an oil company or a gas company bear some of the burden of what they're doing to the environment, right? And when you talk to economists, they use language like internalizing externalities. Because right now, in our current economic model, the environment is external to a corporation's activities. But if you follow the Anishinaabe paradigm, the Anishinaabe worldview, you could never have such a thing as an externality, right? How can you view the earth as external if the earth is your mother? It's not possible. Similarly, our cultures teach humility. Our cultures teach that when a hunter is successful, they should cut up the moose and give some of it to the elders in their community. They should give some of the moose to the less fortunate. That when they pull in a net full of fish, they should give some of those fish to a family and to the children that may be hungry. How is it possible to have income inequality in a society that demands that its most successful cut up the moose and share it with the less fortunate? Over the years, I've spent many summers sundancing in South Dakota, and it's a beautiful way of life. And one of the most beautiful things that I've heard down at the Sundance is the following. As I was growing up there, they used to tell me this: the chief should be the poorest person in the community. The chief should be the poorest person in the community. And they're not making a political statement by saying that. What they're saying is they're giving a teaching. And they're saying that in the traditional village, in the traditional society, the leader would always put the well-being of those around him before his own. That she would always put the well-being of her people before her own. So as long as there is somebody hungry in the community, if you want to be a leader, you should be giving them your food. As long as somebody doesn't have a roof over their heads, you should be giving them your teepee, your wigwam. As long as somebody is hurting, you should be using your pipe, your drum, your sweat lodge to help them and to heal them. And that's the type of leadership that I really admire. But again, if income inequality is a great issue of our time, ask yourselves, is income inequality possible in a society where it says that the leader should be the poorest person in the community? Right? So I know that our culture, that our elders, that our teachings and traditions have something very powerful, very positive to contribute to the world. Right? We can lead the way forward on the environment, on respecting the earth, on how you can make a living while still making sure that you don't take everything out of the forest. I know that we can lead the way forward on income inequality, that we can show how it is possible to be a leader, to be successful, without impoverishing everybody in the community around you. And that's what I'm really excited by and really moved by. And that's what I hope that everybody here sees in themselves and for themselves, is not just a job, not just a career, but for all of us to help fulfill that vision of our ancestors, for our nations to be leaders with our partners in the treaties. And so for us to fulfill that vision, we each need to pursue our own individual dreams. And by each of us pursuing those individual dreams, it will add up to something great and something substantial. So that means getting educated. It means finding a career. But it also means giving back. It also means volunteering. And it also means being active in the community around yourself. So all these things that I'm talking about, it may seem a little far off or a little far-fetched, but I saw a powerful example of how we are on the verge of tremendous change just a few weeks ago in Winnipeg. Sadly, many of you will know that we lost one of our young sisters in Winnipeg about 3 weeks ago. Her name is Tina Fontaine, 15-year-old young Anishinaabe who was murdered. She turned up in the river on the same day that we lost one of our brothers, Farron Hall, who is known to many in the city as the homeless hero, because he rescued drowning people in the river not once, but twice. So it was a very sad day. And the community was very upset. And talking to people, I knew there was more than just Anishinaabe people who were upset and who were hurt by Tina Fontaine's death. I talked to many non-Native people as well who were offended and who objected to seeing a young child treated in this way, treated so inhumanely. And so we formed a group very quickly, myself and my friend Negon Sinclair from the University of Manitoba, group of women including Leah Gazan of the U of W, and Althea Gibosh, who's known as the Bannock Lady in Winnipeg because she feeds homeless people every Sunday in the inner city. And we put out the call to our allies outside of the Native community as well. And I'm proud to say that even though it was in a dark circumstance and in response to a tragic event, that call was heeded and that the people of Winnipeg rallied together. We held a memorial at the site near the river where we smoked our pipes with the families. And then we marched. More than 2,000 people marched together down Main Street, closing Portage and Main, and onto the Forks. And yes, there was a strong Anishinaabe presence, but there was also many people from other walks of life, the descendants of Europeans, Arabic people, people from Africa, South Asians, and their descendants. And it was a beautiful, remarkable thing. Yes, 1,182 missing and murdered Indigenous women. The media didn't pay attention. But somehow, when it came to the 1183rd, Tina Fontaine, it struck a nerve, it struck a chord, and the community responded. And once the community rose up in that way together, all of a sudden, the Globe and Mail, the National Post, CBC News, CTV National are all covering the story, right? And so it's a breakthrough. It's remarkable. And that's what I'm talking about. Our people rising up to claim our rightful role in the society, but also working together with our allies outside of our own community who understand that now is the time for justice. and now is the time for change to come. So it was a very positive moment for me to witness that in my city. But the best part for me happened later that night on the drive home. I was driving home in my truck with my son. He's 9 years old. His Anishinaabe name is Oshkianan. And he turned to me and he said, Dad, that's the first time that I've ever seen Anishinaabe people leading this city. I was like, damn, this little kid's got it figured out. And he said, and that's the way it should be, because we're first. We're the First Nations. I was like, damn, this kid's 9 years old and he's more eloquent than I am. And then he started asking me, has there ever been an Anishinaabe mayor? Has there ever been an Anishinaabe president? He asked. And we started talking about it. But that is the change that we are on the verge of. Not just a conversation about social justice, not just a conversation about righting the wrongs of the past. For many young people today, they don't see First Nations people as less than. What they see when they see First Nations people is Stanley Cup winners like Jordan Nolan, Juno winners like A Tribe Called Red, intellectuals, writers like Joseph Boyden. For the younger generation of Canadians today, they don't know anything other than seeing Indigenous achievers. So let us work hard and celebrate that and make sure that we continue on that path together. And so I celebrate you all today. I raise you up, I lift you up, and I hold you high in my heart and in my mind. And I say, Kimigwach Shawi Enenim, and Migwach Kapizinda Ayek Minoa. Or as we say in English, thanks for listening to me.
Alrighty, so that was Wab Canoe, the second half of his keynote speech that we just listened to. And so that was part of the Matadizi student orientation that took place back in early September. So just a little reminder of what's coming up. I talked about this a little bit before the show, but there's going to be an Aboriginal Law Student Conference on November 7th. And it's on the 250th anniversary of the Treaty of Niagara, and they're going to explore the Aboriginal law landscape. What's on the horizon? So it's an all-day affair. It's going to take place at the law school, which is located within what many people will remember as the old PACI High School. Beautiful building. And so it's pretty much an all-day affair. There's going to be a dinner in the evening at the Prince Arthur Hotel. So just in terms of who's going to be there, I have they don't have on their website, they don't have a breakdown of the topics that are going to be discussed yet. That's to be announced, I guess. They're working on it. But they do have the list of speakers. So the keynote speaker for this is going to be Professor John Burroughs, University of Victoria, from the Faculty of Law. I've read a few of his books. He's actually the one who, his writings are the ones that drew my attention to the significance of the Treaty of Niagara and the fact that it, you don't do treaties with subjects. So given the fact that the Treaty of Niagara happened in 1764, a year after the Royal Proclamation of 1763, that the implications of that proclamation could not have been to have turned Indigenous peoples into subjects of the British Crown, because you don't do treaties with subjects. So that in some sense is, and I guess, I don't know if you've noticed, but the ads have started already. In fact, I might bring one in. I've only seen one, which is the ads for the fact that in 2017 it's going to be the 150th anniversary of Confederation. And of course, for the people who live inside the Confederation story, Confederation is the founding event of the country. The Constitution, 1867, is considered to be the founding document, and thus forming the founding relationship, which is essentially between, as that story goes, between the English and the French. And, of course, in 1867, 4 colonies essentially became one federated colony. That's Canada East, Canada West, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. PEI sat it out at first, as did Newfoundland, even though they attended the conference. However, there are those who would be willing to argue, and I would probably be one of those, that the Treaty of Niagara is really the founding conference, the founding document, the founding relationship. And that thing that took place in 1867 was by and large a sideshow, colonial sideshow amongst the as I say, the 4 colonies just became a federated colony. At any rate, it's a subject for some discussion, and hopefully when we get the law folks in here on November 13th, I'm hoping, we can begin to entertain something of that conversation. Now, the thing is, you might say, oh, well, law, that's just for lawyers, who cares? And, well, there's maybe some truth to that, but there's 2 ways, I guess, to my mind, of looking at the law. You can sort of say, well, the law is where, the government authorities say, don't do this or else, don't do this or else, or don't do this or else. In other words, it's just a prescriptive list of do's and don'ts, and this is what can happen to you if you do one of the don'ts. However, there's another aspect to law, which is kind of the rational part of it, which is the whole idea is law is supposed to be grounded in, if you like, fundamental principles. And so there's this reasoning process, a kind of cultural, political reasoning process that takes place within the law community, which is what the decisions often involve the explanation of why this is the appropriate decision to be made, reaching all the way up to the Supreme Court. So the idea is that we're dealing with first principles of our society. And so that's where I think it kicks in as of wider relevance to all of us, because ultimately those first principles don't derive just from the interests of lawyers. It's supposed to derive from the interests of the community in some sense. So what's the community and what are our first principles is something of what's at stake in these discussions. So that's what I'm hoping to get into. So as I say, John Burroughs is going to be the keynote speaker. Some of these people I'm personally not aware of, but Jean Taillet is going to speak about Métis issues. There's going to be an Aboriginal rights panel involving Gordon Christie, Douglas S. Sanderson, and Karen Drake, who is here at the Lakehead U Faculty of Law and has been on the show. There's going to be an Aboriginal judicial panel, which is going to involve Harry Laforme, Leonard Mandaman, and Joyce Pelche. And then there's going to be a Sustainable Resource Development and Environmental Issues panel, which will involve Chief Georgianne Morisseau, Professor Peggy Smith, who is here at Lakehead University, and Professor Jason McLean, who might ding a bell because I've noticed over the last, I don't really remember. I was going to say 6 months or so, but it might be longer. He has a column on environmental issues in the Chronicle Journal every week or two. And there will be a special guest speaker, Ovid McCurdy, who of course was former National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. And the dinner, if you're going to show up at the dinner, the keynote speaker will be Justice Harry Laforme of the Ontario Court of Appeal. So that's the upcoming events for the November 7th. So it's all law students, I guess, are able to attend. If you're not a law student but would like to attend, you simply have to go onto the website and register, although I believe they've indicated that the registration is restricted, so you're going to have to do it quickly, I guess. I don't know what the attendance numbers are, but at any rate, so if you're interested in those issues, you can either attend or tune in a week later, November 13th, and hopefully we'll have some of those folks on to discuss those issues. So next week, as I mentioned off the top, we're going to be hopefully getting some of the folks from the Apawin Student Navigator group here at Confederation College, and they're going to come in and chat about what they've been doing. Then Joy Asham and a writer friend are going to come in and talk about writerly things. And then hopefully by that time on November the 6th, Chief Georgianne Morrisseau will be able to come in and we'll talk about things on the plate of the Fort Wayne First Nation. And that's pretty much it. So my name is Bob Goujon. This has been Spirit Canoe. So tune in next week. Of course, if you check out the website, spiritcanoe.ca, that's where the shows will be archived, and you can see we've had 5 or 6 shows up till now. And I should mention, haven't posted it yet, but last week, René Boyer from the broadcasting department here at Confederation College sat in, and we had an interesting conversation about various things. So my thanks to him. And that show will be going up on the website probably tomorrow. So thank you for tuning in. My name is Bob Goujon. This has been Spirit Canoe. Have yourselves a good weekend. Toodaloo.